Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for the people in Europe. Thanks for joining. This is your host for this day, Shweta Verma. I have been on this episodes on the last four episodes, and then we have had a overwhelming response from the people who have joined from across the globe. I would like to congratulate every one of you for your amazing response, and especially your understanding and value for design that you understand and design strategy. Welcome to Mind Leaders Live. This is episode 5. We have with us Alok Nandi. A quick introduction on Mind Leaders Live. Mind Leaders Live is a journey that we have where we invite global leaders from across the globe to come and talk about the value of design and design strategy in their lives, in their projects, and especially in times like these. So this is brought to you by Manipal Global, which is an arm of Manipal, which happens to be a legacy organization in the education space for quite some time now in India. And Spread Design. So Spread Design is a global design strategy and innovation firm with its centers in Bangalore in India and Brussels in Belgium. Since the launch on Saturday, May 2, we have had more than 5,000 people visiting our websites. We have 784 sign-ups for this particular session, which is the highest. So again, that's something that I need to thank you all for. We are closing 200 people online. Almost 195 applications for the course till now. So thank you everyone for that. And now I'll quickly move to introducing Alok, who is zooming in live from Brussels in Belgium right now. Alok was born in Congo and now based in Brussels, working in France and working remotely right now. His parents are from India, as you can see from the name. He and his parents definitely have shared love for cuisine and sweets that we have here. In early 90s, Alok did a book on Satyajit Ray while discovering Kolkata's architecture and while preparing for an exhibition. 1996, Alok worked for a Japan Foundation Fellow. He was a Japan Foundation Fellow working on cinema and Tokyo's vibrant energy. Getting back to Belgium, he was the head of new media for publisher of Tintin, something we'll all know. Alok, you can read more about Alok. I can just go on introducing him for the next 5 minutes, but I'll just stop there. You can read more about him on aloknandi.com. Recently, he has been the global president for IxDA, the Interaction Design Association, which has more than 200 chapters across the globe. We have one in Bangalore as well, which is quite active. He's also an international speaker, a professor at Lyon's Culinary Hospitality Institute, Paul Bocuse. He's an international speaker, and the session is taking place right now out of Spread in Bangalore, with me in Ahmedabad and Alok in Brussels. So with this, we'll move on to a quick, I would say, a conversation that we have for the day. And Alok, you obviously, you're going to talk about the gaps, the tension and the friction of place, design, UX in these moments of questioning and reimagining the next. But first, I would like to start this conversation with how do you navigate between all the places that we have in different geographical locations and different times, because we have too many people who are in different geographical locations and also in different time right now on this session. And you do quite a bit, as I already know, and most of us already know. So how do you navigate is the question.
Thanks, Shweta. Is the audio good? I hope everyone can hear me and see me. We'll have about, as you mentioned, an hour of conversation. And before getting into your question, I thought first to set the stage of this. It's a conversation mode, and what we are trying to do with this series is bring different points of view. And I would first like to thank the Manipal Global and the Spread Design team for having me, because what we are trying to do is explore different questions connected to one major umbrella, which is creative leadership. And we'll come back to that, Shweta, about this complex notion of creative leadership, especially nowadays. So to come to your question, navigating in multiple places, because the topic of today will be focused on place, and place is something very dear to me. It's a concept, it's physical, it's emotional, it's sense-based. So I've been exploring that question from different point of view, and then I thought maybe with this one, we have to be careful. We have to make sure that so many things have been written about place that here we have to focus on what I would say a designerly way of looking at place. And connected to that, your question, navigation. So place is something we are in immersion in. And nowadays, the notion of place has been so multiple. Many of you are sharing the same place as we are busy now together in that Zoom. And the specificity of this place is that we are in sync, synchronous. But we know so many activities about place which are asynchronous. And navigation in places becomes complex when you have many places and many time zones. And my suggestion for us to think about place is first, what do I mean by place? Place for me would be space with memory. And when I talk about memory, I put de facto the notion of time. We go into a place and we remember something about that place which makes that place dear to us. So place with the notion of memory allows us to think about habits, routines, rituals, and all these notions are complex notions that we as designers need to embed in our daily practice of design. So in this conversation, we'll begin with place as a meta notion, and we'll try to get a sense through your questioning and my questioning about how can we think about place in terms of place making, in terms of place which yet don't exist that we have to design, in terms of place where, I'll take an example, your screen is a place, a city is a place, you go in a cafe, it's a place. And while you are in a cafe or in a co-working space, you are in a screen looking at something happening in another part of the globe. You are sharing some stuff in that shared space, which is a place. So I'm using all these confusing notions of space and place and time, and I'm putting all this together to try to see, okay, the fundamental question we are trying to explore is how do we make sense of place and how do we provide meaningful experience out of places? And that's connected to the theme of this conversation, the tension, the friction, and the gaps in between places. And navigation comes here as an interaction modality where while moving, while walking, we are making sense of place. And my suggestion, and now I'm getting to your question, my suggestion to navigate meaningfully in places is to design our own temporal radar. We have to be very rigorous on time in order to enjoy place. And we'll come back to that because it might sound abstract, but through some examples in the flow of our conversations, I'll try to make that more tangible. So to recap, place, navigation, and time, tempo, is how I'll suggest we move into this conversation. Now, to make this conversation more large, as Shweta, you mentioned, people can punch in questions in the Q&A. And at Mind Leaders Live, we are also trying to explore new modalities of conversation. So I'm thinking, why don't we use this moment, this hour we have together, to have some extended conversations in another place? And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So Shweta, does time make sense for you in terms of navigation? So we see there is a temporal gap, and that is the pain of technology, creating some gaps and frustrations and frictions. And we'll come back on that one, I'm sure.
Yeah, so definitely, I totally agree with you on what you mentioned, place being a combination of a space and time, which I think we like. I have arrived at events late, and I have missed events because I wasn't able to reach on time. So that place only exists for a certain amount of time. So yeah, that's definitely something that I resonate with. What I would also try to understand from you, Alok, is how, like, in this situation that we are in, what's your favorite place since the lockdown? And then maybe we can check with the audience as well. But then I would like to understand from you on what's been your favorite place.
Let me give a hint now.
Sure.
My favorite place is my kitchen.
Okay, cool.
Now, the challenge is that the question is quite painful because you are asking someone to choose one place. And I'm sure that many of us have many places. And what I would like to come with is the notion of we as human beings, we are jumping from place to place. Now, when I mean jumping from place to place, it can be physically, it can be emotionally, it can be cognitive. And many of us are combining multiple modalities for navigating into these places. And I see that Thomas, you woke up so early because Thomas is based in Canada and he has joined us. Thanks, Thomas, for being there. You are raising the question of how do we filter, or how do I filter priorities in terms of balancing all these influences in my memory. And that is a super interesting question, which will lead to the next phase of our conversation. It's what we call, in terms of design, multimodalities. How do we navigate in multiple spaces with multiple modalities, taking into account physical one, sensorial one, and looking into one of the questions that many people in this audience will be working or are working on, which is mixed reality, augmented reality, combining what is happening on a screen with what is happening in a physical space. These are all questions that we'll be exploring in the Mind series. How do we design today for multiple spaces with multiple temporalities? And the question of Thomas about how do we balance the influence of something we are experiencing now? I'm rephrasing the question slightly to come to the point of rebalancing the cognitive load and the emotional load in terms to navigate meaningfully. Depends on so many factors that we as designers, we have to project ourselves in the potential usage of place. And that's a complex question. And that is a question that can't be solved in 10, 15 minutes, because what I'm trying to bring in and make sure that our conversation gets complex and abstract enough so that we begin to push our thinking. Because remember, Shweta, one of the challenge of this Mind Leaders Live series is to make us open our eyes into different places and try to connect the dots. And so far we have had 4 sessions. This is the 5th one. And to answer to Thomas' question, I'll use one example. And I'll quote Henri Cartier-Bresson, the photographer. The French photographer Cartier-Bresson used to say that a good photo is a photo where you have alignment between the head, the heart, and the hand. And I'll use that as a metaphor and as a trigger to think about our notion of places where there is a clear focus about our experience of place and our design of place when we have this alignment of what is happening in our head, how do we feel emotionally in our heart, and how it allows us to act meaningfully in that physical place. And there, the notion of place, which is very abstract, very philosophical, very complex, very confusing, allows us designers to think about place in terms of aligning different points and trying to make sure that we are getting things together in a meaningful way. So to try to summarize this fundamental notion of alignment is complex but needed. How do we align what I call the 3H, head, hand, and heart? And how do we make sure that our experience of place is getting interested and interesting through that? That would be one way to dig into that complex topic of place and try to answer to Thomas' question.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. The super interesting concept of head, hand, and heart that you mentioned, and yeah, I think right now what you also mentioned was that, especially for Thomas, I think it's super early, and we being together on this call is also like a mix of our physical spaces that we are in, like I'm at a house, someone might be at work, and also the digital spaces. So I think it's also, when we say mix of different spaces, what we also mean would be physical spaces and digital spaces together. And I think you have had a project where you worked on the augmented reality for museums, and we have something going on at Spread Barn, which is super interesting at a great intersection of physical space and digital space, which is the Design Barn Yoga, where we are running distance yoga classes, which is running online. So how do we see the boundaries between physical and digital spaces and experiences, especially in the current situation, where we are kind of, a lot of people are forced to be in probably a digital space that they haven't been very comfortable with in the past. For example, me, I love being in-person interaction and conversation, but because of the situation, I'm forced to be into this situation. So how do we see the boundaries between physical and digital spaces and experiences?
So let me go back into history.
Yeah.
And some 20 years ago, I was, as you mentioned, working on augmented reality installations for museums.
Yeah.
And I was working on setups like we have now on Zoom. You see me on a camera, and you see the background, and you see when I do this with my hand,
yeah,
you see that it's getting pixelated.
Yeah.
And so we are mixing two layers, the video layer and a synthetic background. We can also mix a foreground. And so these technical questions are interesting for us as designers, as creative people, to try to say, okay, we are mixing different layers of information to create a place. And your question about the boundary between physical and digital is getting blurry, because what we are talking about is, and I'll refer to a philosopher called Deleuze, French philosopher. There is the actual place where we are in. There is the virtual place where we have synthetic information, artificial coming from. And there is the physical place. So the real place, when we talk about reality, it's a mixture of virtuality and actuality. And it's blurring. And your example of the physical place, the Design Barn in Bengaluru, where we have yoga sessions happening, what happened during the lockdown is that people who could not anymore come to that physical place, the design barn, could do their yoga session from their place, but enjoying a shared experience, synchronous, with the person at the design barn giving the yoga session. So the digital and the physical are getting blurred, and what is interesting is that the shared place is both of boundaries which have moved. And that is what is fascinating about place. We have our abilities to move boundaries according to the center of gravity of our actions. By actions, it's not only physical actions, but also emotional and cognitive actions. And that is why I think we need to have these kind of conversations. And I'm curious also to see how people are reacting. That the notion of place is moving from one dimension to another one, and it's getting more and more enriched. It's getting more and more augmented. So to come back to your yoga session at the barn, what happened? In fact, augmented yoga sessions were offered.
Yeah.
And we as human beings, we have the capacity and the ability to ingest many layers of augmentation. And that is what is fascinating about place. When you go in a city, if you go back to a city and some things have changed, you have an element of surprise, and that makes you the experience of the city more interesting. And it's the same with many types of places. So I'm coming with another notion which will come into resonance with the 3H of the place, which is the need of hybridity. An interesting place is a place where you have hybridity and density of hybridity. And that is something I'm sharing with you and the audience, and it's a question for me. Some places, if they are non-hybrid, are they interesting or not? Do they make sense? And stuff like that. So that is a question that I'm sharing with all of us, because it's work in progress. What is a good place? What is an interesting place? For whom it is? And these are all design questions, by the way. How do we make place is an interesting question. And we'll come back to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for drawing the analogy. And I think the way people and businesses have tried to, and ideas have tried to adapt in the current system, I think it has brought together very many examples of how physical and digital can overlap to create a place and bring value to people. Most of the classes are running online, which weren't. A lot of work happening, especially in the IT industry, is now remote, which is again at an intersection of physical and digital spaces. So yeah, I think we have this is a start, and we have a lot to kind of see on how these two places come together, and what else can we build on top of it. And I think we are definitely going to see a lot of, I would say, if not inventions, incremental progressions on the concept of place over the next few months and years. So great. So Alok, personally for me, I'm someone who loves being at events and running events, especially innovation events. That's something that I've been doing regularly for the last 5.5 years. So for me, I think for me to run something online is not as exciting. And when I do that on a repeat mode for a while, I kind of start getting frustrated. So at times we also get fed up of places, and that happens to most of us, I think, at some point of time. So for me, I think it's in the current setup that we have, which is physical plus digital. Obviously, we interact, but I miss the in-person conversation, the in-person, say, interaction, maybe a handshake, maybe a hug. So that's something that I miss. And I think even though we are able to move ahead with our work with the virtual setups that we have, I still miss meeting people in person. So even though there are 500 people online, but then I cannot like have a personal in-person interaction. So to me, it feels like empty. Sorry if it's getting philosophical.
No, it's interesting because what you are pointing towards is we as human beings, we interact.
Yeah.
And all these technologies, and thanks to the internet and cameras and whatever, we are into human to machine to human interactions.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we could not have this. So a place for conversation where we don't have the hug and handshake, but we can still have the conversation.
Yeah.
And the density of interactions has changed, and the nature. That is a phenomena we need to better understand. Knows about Zoom fatigue. Everybody has heard about the WhatsApp fatigue. Because we live in many fragmented places and we have to reconnect and try to extract meaning out of our conversations. You are also alluding by telling that you are missing the handshake, hug, or whatever. We're coming back to the notion of multimodalities I was mentioning at the beginning of. And human to machine to human interactions with other set of multimodalities are questioning how, to your question, how we navigate and how we interact. Because there are two fundamental and complex topics, which is we are place, and we have to take place here as a trigger for our conversations and questioning and our thinking. And out of that, I'm branching that out in terms of navigation. How do I navigate in a place? And interaction. How do I interact with the place and with people? And then I'm reconnecting all this and I'm thinking about the craft of design. Design for me has got three dimensions, which are sharing, making, and reflecting. And I'm going really meta back to basics. How do we share stuff? And that's important. We need to share knowledge to progress into our collective knowledge. How do we make stuff so that we push the shaping of the next? And how do we reflect what we are making so that what we are making is meaningful? So if I take sharing, making, and reflecting as the three building blocks of our activities as design, creative, innovators, whatever, we need to go back into all this and make sure that they are interconnected. I believe that we need to move, go back 150, 200 years in that to what I would call iterative mindset, interactive mindset, into silos, verticals. You are the specialist of that topic, you are scientific minded, but a scientific can be also an artist, a scientific can be a leader, and so forth. So I'm trying to break many assumptions we have and take place as a concept to think about the future in trying to reconnect dots and fragments and pieces of knowledge, push ourselves as an audience, people looking at this video later, and use that as a trigger to provoke ourselves and think about the future. And think about the future means also we need to craft the present. And I'll focus, for example, on questions connected to UI, user interface, and UX, user experience, and so many confusions we have between that. And we'll try to go deep into that, knowing that we have only 15, 20 minutes left. We have many questions, I see, and we'll try to make sure that we try to address stuff. Maybe also we say because we won't be able to address so many questions, I'm thinking of a place where I will go back to the questions we are getting, and I'll try to provide some reactions, and we'll try to build on. And let me give you the URL of that, and maybe Shweta, you can type that. It's narrative.in place. And that is the place where we'll continue some of the conversations here if we don't have enough time to address everything. Does that make sense to you, Shweta?
Yeah, sure, it does. And I think what we have also come up with since the last session is that we have questions. We have 10 questions already, and most of the sessions we have roughly 20 questions. So, and it's not, we do not have enough time to create create again a place for discussion. So what we have done in the past, after the last meeting or after the last session, is that we have tried to connect the person who asked the question and the speaker, and we are trying to do this on our Instagram page, where we put the question out there and tag the person who asked the question and the speaker, so that they can get connected there, and then we take on the conversation as they will want to be. So that's something that we are also doing for all the people who have asked questions since the first session. So all the people who are here and who have been in the past sessions, I would request to keep an eye on the Instagram, because we are also creating a digital place for people to interact, who we cannot address within this time frame that we have.
Shweta, maybe also let's keep in mind that in that digital place, we won't be able to share some fascinating modalities which are smell.
Yeah, correct.
Place and smell are so much interconnected, especially when we talk about food. You know, when we eat food, 80 to 90% of the food pleasure is taking place through our smell.
Yeah.
And the smellscape is something which gives and reinforces the notion of memory. And I see a question coming from Tokyo about that smell. When you go back in a place, you remember that place through the smell, enhances the experience of the place. And so that is a challenge we have. Another challenge, and it won't be in that deep, is the audioscape, the soundscape. So many places are dear to us because of the sound we remember. So I'm opening up to many dimensions, and let's make sure that in the conversation now or later, we keep in mind all these dimensions, and we try to expand as much as possible notions, spaces, which need to be meaningful for the coming weeks and months. We have been constrained this last 2.5 months with coronavirus. And that is why I came up with this topic of place, because we realize now that we miss so much because we've been constrained. It is one of the provocations we need to keep in mind in this session.
Yeah, and now that you speak about you have spoken about interaction majorly, and you have also, I think, been the global president of the Interaction Design Association. So I have a question for you, which is basically on so we have digital to digital interaction, things happening digitally, and then we have interaction in physical spaces. Right now, what's happening is that most of the interaction are a huge combination of physical spaces. Like I have a physical space right now. I have a laptop and a table and a chair that I sit on, and then we have this virtual place or the digital interaction who is in the audience. So what I'm trying to is, how do you think interaction design in general is going to get owing to this new change that we have? And a lot of people have got used to it now. Some people are still settling down, some are not liking it, and they're trying to get back like in-person conversations. So how will change the interaction of people and the communities over time?
So are you talking about interaction designers or the practice of interaction design?
So I think first the action, then we'll come to interaction designers.
Okay, I just need to clarify one paradox in which I'm a little bit lost in, which interaction design as a practice has seen its emergence about 20, 25 years ago. But if you go back into about 50 years, that is the so-called the of HCI, human-computer interaction, which was more scientifico-techy. And so designers said we need to bring back behavioral activities back into our thinking and our making. And my frustration is it has led us to what I call the narrow definition of interaction design, which is designing with pixels. If you look back, have people coming from UI, user interface, we are all looking at the pixel. Yeah. And then there was a frustration some 10, 15 years, and people need to look more at the system, UX, user experience. And UX, customer experience, is another notion from another school of thought. So when I build on your about interaction design, what I'm trying to re-question ourselves is we have spent the last 15, 20 years with interaction design in its narrow definition. Let's go back to what happened 1,000, 5,000 years ago, where people were interacting without technology, but they were interacting. And what I'm trying to push here in our conversation and in our thinking is that maybe we need to look back at interaction modalities without technology, but where sense and emotion and other modalities were so important, and bring back that in our thinking, in our reflecting, in our making, in our shaping, and say, how will that push our practice of design? Because it will have an impact on augmented reality design. It will have an impact on mixed reality design. It will push us to think about how do we use sensor to capture information, because it will lead us to say, okay, IoT, Internet of Things. What does IoT allow us today? What can IoT allow in the future? How would that result in changing the perception we have of place? And how are we putting into that set of complex questions the notion of privacy, of autonomy, of dignity, some ethical questions, because we need to talk also about that. And I'm putting all this together because it has an impact about place making, place shaping. And in this community of mind attendees, we need to push all these complex questions together, re-question them, and come with what we could call creative destruction or destructive creation. We need to be critical. And what I have been doing for the last 40, 50 minutes is I began with a very simple proposition. Place is space with memory, and I have embedded time. And then I talked about the 3H, head, hand, heart, to make it more experiential and tangible. But if we look back at our conversation for the last 10, 15 minutes, I was insisting on two things: hybridity and holistic views. So if we put head, hand, heart, hybrid, and holistic, we have what I call the 5H. And next to that, I'm adding a 6th H, which is hyper. Hyper thinking, hyper object, hyper navigation, and it reconnects to my point about jumping from place to place, hyper navigation. And so if we put the 6H together, that would be my provocations and my thinking about places in triggering questions, trying to re-understand notions of places today with this 6H and allow us to have a kind of a framework to explore new design questions or old design questions revisited. And that allows us, maybe you, to be lost in confusion, because that is what I want. I want us to be lost in the place, to try to identify the gaps and try to come back with new habits, because we tend to be lost in habits. Remember, habit, if you go back in Latin, is about the same regular way of doing stuff. But habitat is about our place where we are living, a habitat.
Yeah.
You see? So from holistic, which is looking at meta, to habitat, which is looking at our grounded experiential stuff, with habits which are interconnecting, how many H did I have so far? And you see that my framework is building in this conversation with the H, the 3H of head, hand, heart. Then I came out with the 3H with holistic, hyper, and hybrid. And then I come finally with my 7th H, which is habitat. And connecting all this is H for human and H for hyper. And I have my 9H. And if I took my 9H together, it allows us to think about design in other ways. It's triggering questions. And designers, we are there for triggering questions and re-questioning assumptions. So by now you are completely lost.
Yeah.
But you have 9H to try to make sense of that. And that is where I wanted us to bring towards. As creative leaders, as designers, as people who are shaping the next, we need to be lost in confusion and then extract and make sense. Design sense, as would Sonia Manchanda, the co-founder of Spread, talk about. In order to make sense, we need to create chaos. And that is why I thought I will take this hour together to take place as what we think a very simple notion, and to expand and to open up, to open up, to open up. And then we can have workshops, we can have conversations, we can have argumentations, and try to explore the next. Because remember what is happening on the planet. 60-70% of the planet was immobilized because of one stuff, COVID-19. And today everybody is talking about we need to avoid going back to the normal. We need something which is not back to the normal. So how do we do that? And my question to all of us and to you, Shweta, is the how. If we keep the same habits as we had before COVID, we'll be lost in the same boring, bloody places that we need to re-question. And we have this unique moment where we have to question the habits with the other 8H I mentioned to you. And I'll put later on a web page this 9H and try to document based on the questions and the conversations so that we build up that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are two super interesting things that I can extract out of what you just mentioned. One is that how people are either forced to or by choice reimagine places or interactions out of frustration. I think that you mentioned one was 100 years back roughly, and the other one 30 years back. So and we are in a situation when we are where we are, and most of us are frustrated, as we last saw in the poll. And then the H thing, the 9H that you mentioned. And while you were talking, I was actually in my head trying to build a workshop on how we can actually make people connect with these different H entities that you just mentioned, and how we can kind of fuel co-creation at the intersection of all of that. So with this, I would like to quickly throw a question, I think, at the audience on how we can how do we reimagine the places or ideas of place that we have owing to the frustration that we are in right now. And then I'll come back to you with one more very important question. As you mentioned, both interaction being limited to pixels, which is the user interface, and also the user experience part, because it's a hot topic in design world, because we are growing digitally and also in India. So should we have the poll, or do you want to add something here?
Let me add something, because I see that Senthil is asking who's the target audience for this learning.
Yeah.
Product managers. And that is a fundamental question. What is a product today? A product today is a combination of digital, physical, service. And so a word like place and a word like product are two triggering words where we need to re-question many things. So to Senthil, I would say this is fundamental for product managers, because we need, as people who are trained to become product managers, we need to provide them with holistic set of tools, looking at all this H I was mentioning. Because a product is no more an object, that is 20th century thinking. We need to move into 21st century thinking, and a product is a combination of physical, digital, service-oriented stuff, and that we need to combine all of this. So I hope that even if this seems abstract for some product managers, they need to come into 21st century and re-question and embed and integrate all these notions. But Shweta, the floor to you.
Okay, so the question to audience that I would like to throw right now is, how do we reimagine places or the idea of place? Can we have the next poll, please? And since most of us said that we are frustrated owing to the whatever reason, I think this is a good time to reimagine. This is the same drill. You select the option and you submit. In case you choose others, you make sure that you put it in the chat box so that we know what exactly are you talking about when you say, how could you reimagine places? So the options are there on your screen right now: by chatting, traveling, reading, and inspired by movies. So I probably would say other, because I would pick up a mix of two of these definitely. So can we have the results of the poll, please? Okay, so I think traveling is winning. And Alok, I think you would be the right person to comment on it, because you have traveled more than, definitely more than me. And we also had someone, I think the first question was from Thomas, where he asked, how do you filter priorities? What kind of experience are dominant in memory? So maybe you can connect these two on how does traveling kind of help?
So what is interesting is, I assume that many people, when they're talking about traveling, is the physical traveling to another place.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that reading a novel could be also traveling.
Yeah.
Watching a movie is traveling and projecting ourselves with the characters. And so when we are thinking about this notion of travel, it comes so well in resonance with the notion of place.
Yeah.
Because we are all traveling when we are getting out of our usual habitat and exploring other spaces, times, and places. Why is it so important for us in terms of reimagining? It comes into connection with the notion of hybridity. You remember someone in the chat said that something always the same is boring.
Yeah.
We as human animals, we need small surprises. Otherwise, we get lost into that boring, and it kills the energy of us pushing ourselves towards the next. And that is where I'm reconnecting some of the dots. Does that resonate when I say that, Shweta? Because you're asking how.
Definitely, yes. And I think this is something that has also come in from what we have in the chat. So yes, I think I would totally agree on traveling mentally rather than traveling physically. And I think with us, all of us being in the digital economy, we are definitely prone to more of travel in the digital space rather than, or in the mental space as compared to physical, because that's more exhausting. And that's, I think, I think the mental travel is way more economical with the
Now,
amount of information and the internet that we have now.
now we can also add what Samrat from Kolkata is coming to, gaming place.
Yeah. Okay.
Gaming is an important set of activities that many of us have. And what is interesting with game is that you are escaping yourself in another place and getting into immersion into that place. And you are having actions. And that is something fascinating in terms of place exploration. So when you are designing games, you need to think about clues in order to make sure that all these gaming actions are getting into place phase after phase. And these are complex questions. So game designers, if we have some game designers in the addition, with the attendees, this is a fascinating place where we can then connect to UX, UI, game design, and try to push our thinking.
Sure. So I have worked on something that is a very recent project that is basically the prototyping was a gamification approach to solve a particular problem. And all the people in the audience, if you are in the gamification space, let's get connected, and then we can see how we can explore it further. So coming back to the topic, Alok, that I mentioned some time back, UI and UX, and somehow it's mentioned UI UX together. And I don't understand why that happens, because to me, like being in design space and being there as a mentor, UI is already a part of the entire UX journey. But somehow UI UX has become a term, and especially in India, when we talk about India, the Indian industry is typically IT dominant, and most of the people who are in the I would say urban spaces, who are a part of making conversations and making these communities, they are a part of IT, the IT clan that we have here. And somehow when things grow, they have an influence of the ecosystem that they grow up in. And when I say UI UX in India, people are going to think of mobile screens or website screens at max, or web pages. The moment I say UI UX, no one's going to think of, or very few people are going to think of a table or a chair that we sit on, which definitely has a UI and a UX. So that has become the definition of UI UX in India, owing to the space that we have grown up in. So what's your comment on that, and how is it for you? What's the definition for you in Brussels? Is it same? Is it more inclined towards software products or digital products, or is it more broader, the definition?
So we have an interesting worldwide phenomena, which is UI and UX are put together because of some historical reasons for the last 15 years. And it is a pain. It is a pain because we need to be critical about that. And I'll say human resources managers, when they are recruiting, they created maybe that mixture. And we as design professionals, we let that go. I'll give you another example. Everywhere on the planet, we have heard about social distancing. And that was, for me, a complete mistake. It's about physical distancing. But everybody is talking about social distancing. And so we have the same kind of hallucination. We take some language, we put them together, and we let it go. And that is a problem I don't have any answer. And for me, UI/UX is a global phenomena, not only in India, where we put all this together. Is that part of laziness? Maybe. Is that part of a kind of bad habit? Maybe. And so we need to be critical about that. And to answer to your question, it is happening everywhere. Here in Brussels, in France, in the US, UI/UX is put together. And some of us are getting a little bit sick of that. It's like the word design thinking. Anyone thinks they can do design thinking after a workshop of 2 days.
Yeah.
And these are the provocation and the conversations we need to have as a community. And I see that Alexandra is asking to come back on the notion of hyper. Hyper, what is HTML? Hypertext Markup Language. And HTML is the layer fundamental for us having websites and mobiles devices talking to each other as machine, and us having this conversation thanks to that layer and some other layers. So hyper as a word is so fascinating because it allows us to jump from one knowledge place to another knowledge place. And that is, the web is a hyper place, allowing us to connect one page to another page. And that is the beauty of hyper. So hyper in the 60s, 70s, and in the public domain in the 90s, allowed us to push our thinking about reimagining place. Go back to early 90s, Netscape. Shweta, maybe you are not yet born, I don't know. But the first generation of websites were based on this hyper journey from one point to the other. And that reconnects to your question about UI, UX, and all this interaction design practice, is let's not be stuck in a place of the last 25 years. And let's take distance. And with this Mind series, let's re-question how we look at systems. This MLL is the 5th one. But if I go back in the 4 previous weeks, we had some other inputs and insights. Like Kansu, who's based in New York and who's coming from Turkey, she was talking about what I call the hurt and the emotional dimensions and the global ways of a designer moving from one place to the other. We had from Madrid the previous speaker who was talking about the need of curiosity, the unknown unknowns. In fact, what I've been spending time with you here is, what about place being an unknown unknown? And how do we re-question so many stuff? So you see, what I'm trying to do here is connecting dots between this session with many notions and the previous sessions where we had different ways of looking at system. And Thomas Garvey, who raised a question about memory and about kitchen. Thomas, we had a conversation with him in another place, which we call Design Open Happy. And I'll invite all the attendees to check the video, which is coming out these days, about a fundamental notion that Thomas shared with us, and I hope Thomas is still with us, is the notion of density. Density is something which for me is connected to what place can be experienced through width. And remember the poll you said, if there are too many people, that is crowded place, we get fed up. Density and crowded are different, and Thomas is expanding on that. So I'm reconnecting all these notions and say, okay, maybe we need to push our conversation and go deeper into all this. And I see that we are already 8 minutes after the hour. Yes. We have many questions. We have quite a number of reactions on in the chat. Yeah, Shweta, many questions and super fascinating and interesting questions. So we'll need to expand that later. I'll take Abhijit Sen's question about social structure as a breaker of community activities and how can design help retaining the balance between real and virtual. That is a complex question which we need to work on by doing. What I mean, Abhijit, is that we need to prototype some stuff to see how it works, how it shapes, and we don't have simple answers to that. I'll give you an example, which is maybe a tough one, and I'm sure Shweta, you'll be shocked, but I think Facebook is badly designed. As a place, when you go on Facebook, it's a nightmare. I don't know how many of you agree with that or how many disagree. If we have conflict about that, I'm happy. If there are people on Facebook working for Facebook in this attendee, happy to have conversation, but I think we are missing many attributes of a place, an interesting place. A place is good if I know how I can go from A to B, projecting myself. If I know how I can come back to the place where I was. So I'm talking about information design. Place requires information design or wayfinding and stuff like that. And so these notions of information design, wayfinding are not only digital, they are not only physical, they are also cognitive. And all these are connected to social structures. So that's how I connect to the question Abhijit Sen is alluding to. And we need to have designers and creative people who are able to absorb all this and reconnect dots. And so I'm sure that I'm opening up again another chapter where we could spend an hour conversing, but I wanted to focus on that one. But we have some other questions where we can expand, and
yeah, sure.
I'll take just one word, which is a very Frenchy word. You know by now that I'm a French speaker. The word déjà vu. Déjà vu is something which is used in English, but it comes from French. Déjà means already. Vu means seen, already seen. So what is fascinating and exciting with all of us as creative people is that when there is a déjà vu feeling, we get bored. And we need to push ourselves to come with something else. We have that in music. So many musical movements, fed up of déjà vu, we come with new stuff. We see that in the art scene. We see that in so many social activities. And so I would argue that for us to have interesting places, we have to combine between déjà vu and not déjà vu, and slightly break the boundaries of déjà vu to create happy surprises. And that would be a way to close the conversation at this stage, in this moment, in this place. But I invite all of us to continue this conversation. So what I think we'll do, Shweta, is we'll collect all the questions, and I'll work on that. And on narrative.in/place, I'll put the answers there, and we can use that as a place to continue and push our thinking, our reflection, and maybe making new places for conversation. Is that okay for you?
Sure, yeah, that's something that we have also been planning, and we'll also explore on narrative.in on how we can also leverage that. We were trying to use Instagram because that's a very popular place for people to be now that we are all out there digitally. Even the people who didn't like Facebook or Instagram are now on Instagram and Facebook. So thanks a lot. Especially, I think that's an interesting comparison to draw between deja vu and how to kind of have the deja vu and non-deja vu interaction further. So definitely a lot of thought-provoking, I think, conversations here. So with this, I would like to close the session for the day. I would like to thank everyone who overstayed for almost 10 minutes. Usually, I think we have had the closing words from Alok already, so we are skipping the video that we play by him on all the other episodes.
Thanks everyone, and looking forward to continue the conversations in other places.